My son looked at me with tears in his eyes at the departure gate and said he loved me. 3 hours later, I found out he had flown back to Chicago without me, leaving me stranded in a Turkish airport with absolutely nothing. No passport, no money, no ID. He thought he had committed the perfect crime. He thought the cold or the Turkish police would finish me off. He was already spending the money from selling my house. But he forgot one thing. I used to hunt men like him for a living. When he unlocked the front door of my house to celebrate his victory, I was already sitting in his favorite chair waiting, and I had a surprise that would cost him his freedom. Before I tell you how I destroyed his life, let me know which city you are tuning in from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated you. The massive digital clock above the Istanbul departure terminal blinked 11:45 p.m. The red numbers blurred as sweat stung my eyes. "Move your feet, Douglas. We are going to miss the connection," Brittany screamed. Her voice cut through the noise of the crowded terminal like a rusty saw. My daughter-in-law was walking 10 paces ahead, dragging her expensive carry-on while I struggled to keep up. My left hip, the one with the titanium pin from '78, was screaming in protest with every step. I adjusted the strap of my worn duffel bag and tried to catch my breath. "We have 4 hours, Brittany," I wheezed. "The connection is not until 3 in the morning." She spun around so fast her blonde hair whipped a passing tourist in the face. She did not apologize. She just glared at me with those cold, calculating eyes that I had distrusted since the day Justin brought her home. "Do not argue with me, Douglas," she snapped. "You know how security is here. Do you want to be the reason we get stuck in Turkey?" Justin, my son, the boy I had raised alone since he was 10, was walking beside her. He looked pale. Sweat beaded on his upper lip, even though the terminal was freezing. He refused to meet my eyes. "Dad." "Just hurry up, okay?" Justin muttered, checking his watch for the 10th time in a minute. "We need to get to the gate." I felt a sharp pang of disappointment, not because of the rush, but because of his weakness. He was 35 years old, but he let this woman drive him like a rental car. "Fine," I grunted, forcing my legs to move faster. "I just need to sit down for a minute. My pills are in the bag." We reached a fork in the terminal concourse. To the left was the main shopping area, bright and loud. To the right was a long, dimly lit corridor, leading to the high-numbered gates. "Gate 42. Justin said, pointing down the dark hallway. "That is us." "It looks empty," Brittany said, frowning. "Perfect. Less noise." She looked at me with a sneer. "Maybe you can finally stop complaining about your hip if you sit down." I ignored her and kept walking, but Justin stepped in front of me. His hand was trembling slightly as he reached for my shoulder. "Dad." "Listen," he said, his voice cracking. "The bathroom is back near the food court. Brittany and I are going to grab some water and use the restroom before we settle in at the gate. Why do not you go ahead to gate 42 and save us seats?" "It is a long walk back," I said. "I will just come with you." "No." Brittany cut in. "You walk too slow. We do not want to miss the boarding call if they move it up. Just go to the gate, Douglas. Do something useful for once." Justin looked at my duffel bag. The bag that contained my passport, my wallet, and my blood pressure medication. "Here, Dad, let me take that," Justin said. "It is heavy. You just walk to the gate. I will bring it to you in 10 minutes. I hesitated. A soldier's instinct is a funny thing. It tingles at the base of your neck when something is wrong. But this was my son, my flesh and blood, the boy I taught to ride a bike. I looked at his sweaty face and saw only stress, not malice, or so I thought. "Okay," I said, handing him the bag. "Do not take too long. I need those pills." Justin grabbed the bag a little too tightly. "I love you, Dad," he said. It sounded like he was choking on the words. Then he turned and walked away with his wife. They did not look back. Not once. I limped down that long, dark corridor towards Gate 42 alone. I did not know I was walking into a tomb. The walk to Gate 42 felt like a descent into a basement. The polished tile floors of the main concourse gave way to stained gray carpet, and the vibrant duty-free shops were replaced by flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped flies. There was not a single soul in this wing of the airport. No sleeping travelers curled up on benches. No bored airline staff tapping on computers. Just rows of empty metal chairs facing a dark window that looked out onto the black tarmac. Justin stopped in front of a row of seats that looked like they had not been sat in for years. "You stay here, Dad," he said. "Dad, His voice was too loud in the empty space. "Brittany and I are going to find a vending machine near the main hub. The water fountains back there are broken." I collapsed into the nearest chair, letting out a groan as the pressure lifted off my bad hip. The relief was immediate but fleeting. I looked up at my son. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, unable to stand still. His eyes darted around the empty gate area, checking the corners as if looking for cameras. "Okay," I said, rubbing my thigh. "Just be quick. My throat is dry as a bone. And leave the bag here. I can watch it." Justin froze. For a split second, I saw a flash of panic on his face before he masked it with a forced smile. "No, Dad," he said, reaching down. "It is too heavy for you to watch. What if you need to use the restroom while we are gone? You cannot lug this thing around. I will take it. It is safer with me." Before I could protest, he grabbed the strap of my duffel bag, the bag that held my passport, my wallet with all my credit cards, and most importantly, the beta blockers I needed to take in exactly 20 minutes. It felt wrong. Every instinct I had honed in the Marines screamed that this was a tactical error. You do not surrender your survival kit. But I looked at Justin, and I did not see an enemy. I saw the boy I had taught to fish on Lake Michigan. I saw the son who had cried at his mother's funeral. I let go of the strap. "Okay," I said. "Just hurry back. Do not make me miss this flight." Justin nodded vigorously. "I promise, Dad. 10 minutes tops." He turned on his heel and walked away fast. He did not look back. He did not wave. He just marched toward the light of the main terminal until his silhouette was swallowed by the distance. I sat there in the silence. The air conditioning was colder in this part of the terminal. It seeped through my thin jacket and settled into my bones. I checked my wristwatch. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The silence was broken only by the distant echo of announcements in a language I did not understand. A woman's voice over the intercom spoke in Turkish, then in English, announcing a final boarding call for a flight to London. I watched the digital clock on the wall tick forward. 20 minutes. My mouth was so dry my tongue felt like sandpaper. Where were they? It does not take 20 minutes to buy a bottle of water. I stood up, ignoring the sharp protest of my hip, and walked to the large window. Outside it was pitch black. There was no plane parked at the jet bridge for Gate 42. In fact, the jet bridge was pulled back and dark. I turned to look at the information screen above the desk. It was blank. Not a flight number. Not a destination. Just a black screen reflecting my own worried face. A cold knot formed in my stomach that had nothing to do with the airport air. I limped to the middle of the corridor and squinted down the long hallway, hoping to see Justin's red jacket. Nothing. Just the endless row of empty chairs and the buzzing of those lights. That was the moment the first crack appeared in my denial. I sat back down, not because I wanted to rest, but because my legs suddenly felt too weak to hold me up. The silence in the waiting area had become a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I had counted every single ceiling tile in the corridor. 312. I had checked my watch so many times the leather strap was leaving a red mark on my wrist. It was now 3:30 in the morning. 3 hours had passed since Justin took my bag and walked away. The logical part of my brain, the part that had planned convoy routes in the desert, told me that something was terribly wrong. But the father in me was still making excuses. Maybe Brittany got sick. Maybe they got lost in the duty-free maze. Maybe security held them up. I stood up and my left leg almost buckled underneath me. The cold air from the vent above had stiffened the joint around the titanium pin, making it feel like rusty metal grinding on bone. I could not sit there for one more second. I needed to find a human being. I limped out of the dark holding area of Gate 42 back toward the main corridor. It was eerily quiet. The cleaning crews had moved on to other sections, leaving behind the chemical smell of floor wax and vast stretches of emptiness. Finally, I saw a figure in the distance. A man in a neon yellow safety vest, pushing a cart full of trash bags. I waved my arms and shouted, "Hey, you there? Excuse me?" My voice echoed off the glass walls, sounding desperate and small. The man stopped and leaned on his broom, watching me hobble toward him with a look of mild annoyance. I reached him, gasping for air. "Please," I wheezed. "My son, the flight to Chicago. Is it delayed? Why is there no plane at Gate 42? The janitor frowned and shook his head, muttering something in Turkish. He pointed to his ear, indicating he did not speak English. I felt a surge of panic rising in my throat like bile. "Chicago," I said louder, enunciating every syllable. "United States. Plane. Where is the plane?" He stared at me for a moment, then pulled a small radio from his belt. He said a few words into it, and a moment later a woman's voice crackled back. He looked at me and held up 2 fingers. 2 hour, he said in broken English. "Gone. 2 hour ago." My heart stopped. "No," I said, shaking my head violently. "No, that is impossible. We are on the connection. Justin said it was Gate 42. The man looked at me with pity in his eyes, the kind of look you give a stray dog that has been hit by a car. "Gate 42. Close," he said, pointing down the dark hall. "Maintenance, no flight here. Chicago flight, Gate 21, far away." Departed. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Gate 21. That was on the complete opposite side of the terminal. We had walked 20 minutes in the wrong direction. Justin knew. He had looked at the board. He had the tickets. A roar of pure adrenaline drowned out the pain in my hip. I pushed past the janitor and started to run. It was a clumsy, agonizing shuffle, but I moved as fast as my old body would allow. I had to get back to the spot where I last saw them. Maybe he was looking for me. Maybe he was frantic. I ran until my lungs burned and black spots danced in my vision. I reached the fork in the concourse where the vending machines were supposed to be. It was empty. The lights were dimmed. There was no red jacket, no blonde hair, no duffel bag, just a row of silent vending machines humming in the darkness. I spun around in a circle, looking in every direction, screaming his name until my voice cracked. "Justin. Justin." The only answer was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant squeak of the janitor's cart. I was alone. Truly and completely alone. I stood frozen in front of the vending machines, my chest heaving as I tried to pull air into my burning lungs. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a sick yellow glow, illuminating the empty corridor. They were gone. Really gone. My eyes frantically scanned the row of metal benches where Justin had stood just 30 minutes ago. There was no sign of them. No red jacket. No expensive luggage. But then I saw it. A single white plastic grocery bag sat lonely on the gray seat. It looked like trash someone had forgotten to throw away. It was not my heavy canvas duffel bag. It was a cheap, flimsy thing from a duty-free shop. I limped over to it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were shaking so violently that I fumbled trying to grab the handles. I ripped the plastic open, dumping the contents onto the seat. Garbage. An empty wrapper from a protein bar, a half-drunk bottle of water, and a piece of paper. It was a page torn from a small spiral notebook folded in half. I recognized the paper. It was from the notebook Brittany used to keep track of her shopping list. I picked it up, my fingers feeling numb. I unfolded it slowly, dreading what I would find. The handwriting was scrawled and messy like it had been written in a hurry, but I knew that script. I had taught the boy how to hold a pen. It was Justin's. Dad, the note read. I am sorry, but we had to do this. We need our freedom, and you are suffocating us. Please understand that we cannot take care of you anymore. Do not try to come back to Chicago. We are selling the house and moving on. There is some cash in the bag. Start a new life here. It is better this way. Goodbye. I stared at the words, the letters swimming before my eyes. Start a new life here. In Turkey. With no language. No home. I looked back at the pile of trash on the seat. Cash. He said there was cash. I grabbed the plastic bag and shook it upside down. A single $20 bill fluttered out and landed on the dirty carpet. $20. My son had valued my life at $20. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, a dry, hysterical sound that frightened me. I fell to my knees, ignoring the shooting pain in my hip, and began to tear through the garbage on the seat. I ripped apart the protein bar wrapper. I shook the water bottle. Where is my passport? I screamed at the empty air. Where is my wallet? Where are my pills? I needed my beta blockers. Without them, my heart would go into arrhythmia within 48 hours. Justin knew that. He sat in the doctor's office with me when they prescribed them. This was not just abandonment. This was attempted murder. He had taken my identity, my money, and my medicine. He had stripped me of everything that made me Douglas Bennett and left me as a ghost in a foreign land. I crawled around on the floor, checking under the seats, praying that maybe, just maybe, he had left my passport behind. But there was nothing. Just dust bunnies and that $20 bill mocking me from the floor. The reality crashed down on me with the weight of a collapsing building. I was 72 years old. I was thousands of miles from home. And I had ceased to exist. The echo of my scream had barely faded from the metal walls when the heavy boots arrived. Two men in dark blue uniforms materialized from the shadows of the terminal. They were not smiling. They were Turkish police officers, and they looked at me with the kind of bored aggression I used to see in the eyes of MPs breaking up bar fights near the base. One of them, a young man with a thick mustache, barked something at me in Turkish. His hand rested casually on the baton at his belt. I tried to stand up, but my hip locked, and I stumbled back against the vending machine. This only made them more aggressive. Passport. The older officer demanded, holding out a gloved hand. Passport now. I held up my empty, trembling hands. I do not have it. I said, my voice raspy and weak. My son, he took it. He took everything. I tried to mime the action of theft, pointing to the empty seats and then to the exit, but the officers just exchanged a look of disgust. To them, I was not a stranded American businessman or a decorated Marine veteran. I was just another senile old vagrant making a scene in their airport. The younger officer grabbed my arm. His grip was like a vice clamping down on my bicep, right where the muscle had wasted away with age. I winced. Hey, watch it, I snapped, instinctively pulling back. That was a mistake. In a split second, I was spun around and slammed chest first against the cold metal of the vending machine. My cheek was pressed against the glass front, staring at a row of chocolate bars I could not afford. Stop resisting, the older one shouted in heavily accented English. You go now! They did not wait for me to explain. They each grabbed an arm and began to drag me toward the automatic doors. My feet barely touched the polished floor. I tried to dig my heels in, but my sneakers just squeaked helplessly on the tile. People were starting to stare now. A group of flight attendants in pristine red uniforms looked over and quickly averted their eyes. A businessman talking on his phone stepped out of the way, looking at me with pure revulsion. The shame burned hotter than the pain in my shoulder. I wanted to scream that I built skyscrapers in Chicago. I wanted to scream that I was a father. But no sound came out. They marched me past the warmth of the coffee shops, past the security checkpoints, and straight to the spinning glass doors of the exit. The blast of air that hit me when the doors opened felt like a physical punch. It was not just cold. It was the biting, damp freeze of an Istanbul winter night. The wind cut right through my thin windbreaker and settled deep into my bones. With a final shove, they threw me out onto the concrete curb of the pickup zone. I stumbled and fell hard on my hands and knees, the grit of the pavement scraping my palms raw. "Go!" The young officer spat, pointing a gloved finger at the darkness beyond the airport lights. "No come back. Police come back, you jail." The glass doors slid shut with a soft hiss, sealing the warmth and the light inside. I scrambled up and pressed my hands against the glass. "Please," I yelled. "It is freezing. I have nowhere to go." The officers did not even turn around. They were already walking back to their post, laughing about something. I stood there, shivering violently, as the condensation from my breath fogged up the glass. The airport terminal looked like a spaceship, glowing in the night, warm and safe and completely impenetrable. I turned around and looked at the city. It was a sea of black fog and distant headlights. I had no coat. I had no money. I had no name. As the first snowflake landed on my cheek, I realized my son had not just left me behind. He had sentenced me to death by hypothermia. The sliding doors of the terminal were a gateway to another world. Behind me was civilization, warmth, and safety. Ahead of me was a concrete wilderness wrapped in a freezing fog. I huddled against a concrete pillar, trying to shield myself from the biting wind, but my thin windbreaker was useless against the Turkish winter. I was shaking so hard, my teeth chattered a rhythm I could not control. I looked down at my feet. My orthopedic sneakers, the ones that cost $200 and kept my hip aligned, were the only things keeping me from the frozen pavement. I did not know they would be the next thing I lost. They came out of the shadows like wolves scenting a wounded deer. 3 of them. Young men with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. They did not speak English, but violence is a universal language. One of them pointed a rusted knife at my stomach, while the other 2 circled behind me. I instinctively raised my hands, shifting into a defensive stance I had learned at Paris Island 50 years ago. But my mind was writing checks my 72-year-old body could not cash. When I tried to pivot, my bad hip gave way and I crumbled to the asphalt. They were on me in a second. Hands rifled through my empty pockets, finding nothing. Then they saw the shoes. The leader barked a command, and one of the boys grabbed my ankle. I kicked out, connecting with a shin, but it was a weak blow. The retribution was swift. A heavy boot slammed into my ribs, cracking something deep inside my chest. I gasped for air, curling into a ball as they tore the laces. They yanked the sneakers off my feet with brutal efficiency, taking my socks with them. Then they were gone, disappearing back into the mist, leaving me gasping on the freezing ground. I lay there for a long time, watching the taillights of taxis fade into the distance. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked. To the world passing by, I was just a pile of rags. I forced myself to stand up. My bare feet hit the pavement, and the cold was a physical shock that traveled straight up my spine. It had started to snow again, a wet, slushy mix that turned the ground into a sheet of ice. I took a step and gasped, then another. Every step was agony. My toes began to go numb within minutes, turning a pale, waxy blue. I started walking toward an underpass I could see in the distance, seeking shelter from the wind. And as I walked, leaving bloody footprints in the slush, the realization hit me with more force than the kick to my ribs. This was not just an abandonment. This was an execution. Justin knew about the weather. He knew I had no heart medication. He knew I could not walk far without those shoes. He did not just want me out of the way, he wanted me dead. He wanted nature to do the dirty work so he could keep his hands clean. He wanted to tell his friends back in Chicago that his father had tragically passed away during a layover due to natural causes. He wanted the insurance money without the guilt of pulling a trigger. I stopped walking and looked up at the indifferent gray sky. A fire ignited in my belly, hot enough to keep me warm. "You made a mistake, son," I whispered to the empty night. "You should have made sure I was dead before you got on that plane. Because now I am not just a father anymore. I am a ghost. And ghosts always come back to haunt the living. Hunger is a strange thing. First it hurts, then it screams. Then it just becomes a hollow echo in the center of your body, reminding you that you are dying." By the time the sun began to rise over the minarets of Istanbul, I had passed the screaming stage. My stomach was a knotted fist, but my mind was sharpening. The initial shock of the betrayal was fading, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I was 72 years old. I had no shoes. I had no money. But I was not dead yet. And I refused to die just to make my son's life easier. I leaned against the rough brick wall of an alleyway, shivering violently. My body wanted to curl up and sleep, but my training screamed at me to move. "Get up, Marine." That was the voice of Sergeant Miller, my drill instructor from 50 years ago. It echoed in my head as clear as a bell. Improvise. Adapt. Overcome. If you stop moving, you die. I forced my frozen legs to straighten. My hip joint felt like it was filled with broken glass, but I pushed through the pain. I needed insulation. The windbreaker I was wearing was useless against the damp morning fog. I scanned the alley. It was filthy, lined with overflowing dumpsters from the nearby restaurants. In my previous life back in Chicago, I would have crossed the street to avoid the smell. Now that smell represented survival. I limped toward a large metal bin behind a closed kebab shop. The lid was heavy, but I shoved it open. The stench of rotting meat and sour yogurt hit me like a physical blow, making my empty stomach heave. I did not turn away. I reached inside, pushing aside slimy bags of food waste until I... what I was looking for. Newspapers. Stacks of them. I pulled out armfuls of the damp paper. I did not care what the headlines said. I did not care about the politics or the news printed on the pages. To me, this was not information. It was heat. I retreated to a dark corner and began the humiliating process. I unzipped my jacket and started stuffing the crumpled pages inside. I packed them around my chest, my kidneys, and my back. I took off my pants, shivering as the cold air hit my bare legs, and wrapped layers of newsprint around my thighs before pulling the fabric back up. The crinkling sound of the paper was loud in the quiet alley. I looked like a scarecrow. I looked like a madman. But for the first time in 6 hours, I felt a tiny pocket of warmth trapped against my skin. I needed to rest. I needed to get off my feet before my hip gave out completely. I saw a small alcove under a concrete staircase a few yards away. It was dry and shielded from the wind. Perfect. I hobbled toward it, clutching my jacket tight. But I was not the only one who had spotted the prime real estate. A low growl rumbled from the shadows. A dog emerged from the darkness under the stairs. It was a large shepherd mix with matted fur and one torn ear. Its ribs showed through its coat, and its eyes were yellow and desperate. It bared its teeth at me, staking its claim on the only dry spot in the alley. In any other life, I would have backed away. I would have felt pity. But not today. Today, I was just another stray animal fighting for a scrap of territory. I did not retreat. I stood my ground and let out a roar that came from the bottom of my lungs. "Get out!" It was a guttural sound, raw and savage. The dog flinched. It looked at me and saw something that frightened it. Maybe it smelled the desperation on me. Maybe it saw that I was more dangerous than I looked. It whimpered once, tucked its tail between its legs, and slunk away into the fog. I watched it go, feeling a profound sense of shame wash over me. I had just bullied a starving animal. I crawled into the space under the stairs and curled up on the cold concrete, my bed of newspapers crinkling around me. I was lower than the dog, but I was warm, and I was alive. Hunger changes the way you see the world. It turns colors into shades of gray and turns every movement into a calculation of energy cost. By the afternoon of my second day, the newspaper insulation was keeping my core warm, but it could not stop the tremors in my hands. I was hallucinating. I smelled pot roast. I smelled the apple pie my late wife used to bake. But it was just the smell of exhaust fumes and rotting garbage. Then I saw it. A miracle wrapped in white paper. A delivery driver for a nearby bakery had dropped a crate, and a single loaf of bread had rolled under a parked van. It was dusty and half flattened by a tire, but to me it looked like a gold bar. I scrambled out from my hiding spot under the stairs. My hips screamed, but I ignored it. I was 5 feet away from the bread when a shadow fell over me. I looked up. Standing between me and my salvation was a man. He was younger than me, maybe in his 40s, with a beard that looked like steel wool and eyes that were completely empty. He was big. He wore a torn wool coat and boots that were 3 sizes too big. He saw the bread. He saw me. And he made a calculation. He saw a withered old man with no shoes and gray skin. He saw easy prey. He did not say a word. He just grunted and lunged for the loaf. My hand got there first. I snatched the bread from the asphalt, but before I could pull it back, he kicked me. His heavy boot caught me in the shoulder, spinning me around. I crashed into the side of the van, dropping the bread. He laughed. It was a wet, gurgling sound. He reached down to take the prize, and something inside me snapped. It was not the anger of a senior citizen. It was the muscle memory of a 20-year-old Marine on a tour in the jungle. I did not think. I reacted. As he bent down, I drove my elbow into the side of his neck. It was a dirty move. A street move. He roared in surprise and swung a wild haymaker at my head. His fist connected with my left eye. The world exploded into white light. The pain was blinding, like a hot poker being driven into my skull. My vision swam, but I did not go down. The adrenaline dumped into my system, masking the agony in my hip. I stepped inside his guard just like Sergeant Miller had taught me a lifetime ago. I grabbed his greasy collar with one hand and drove the heel of my other hand into his nose. There was a sickening crunch of cartilage. The man stumbled back, clutching his face, blood streaming through his fingers. He looked at me with shock. He had expected a victim. Instead, he found a fighter. I did not wait for him to recover. I grabbed the bread from the dirty ground and backed away. Fists still raised, my chest heaving. He cursed at me in a language I did not know, but he did not come closer. He turned and ran, spitting blood on the snow. I slumped against the tire of the van and looked at the bread in my hand. It was covered in grit and motor oil. I did not care. I tore off a chunk and shoved it into my mouth, chewing frantically. It tasted like ash and gasoline, but it was the best meal of my life. I touched my eye. It was already swelling shut, warm and sticky with blood. I was eating trash in an alley with a black eye and a fractured rib. My son had turned me into a savage. And God help him, because savages do not show mercy. By the third night, the cold was no longer my enemy. It had become a strange comfort, because it numbed the fire raging inside my skull. I was burning up. The infection from the cut on my cheek had spread, and my body was fighting a losing war against the bacteria of the Istanbul streets. I lay curled in a fetal position under the concrete staircase, my bed of newspapers soaked through with the freezing rain. I was shaking so violently that my teeth ached, but inside my head I was floating. The darkness of the alley began to dissolve. The smell of wet dog and urine faded, replaced by the sharp scent of antiseptic and wilting lilies. I was not in Turkey anymore. I was back in Chicago in the hospice wing of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It was 10 years ago. My wife Catherine was lying in the bed, her skin as pale as the sheets. She looked so small. The cancer had taken everything from her except her eyes, which were locked onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "Douglas," she whispered, and in my fever dream her voice was as clear as a bell. "Promise me. Promise me you will look after him. He is not like you. He is not strong like you. The world will eat him alive if you do not protect him." I felt the phantom pressure of her hand squeezing mine. "I promise, Catherine," I said to the empty alley. "I will give him everything. I will keep him safe." And I did. God help me, I did. When he crashed his first car, I bought him a new one. When he flunked out of college, I paid off his loans. When he wanted to marry Brittany, that shark in human skin, I paid for the wedding because I thought it would make him a man. I shielded him from every consequence. I protected him from every storm. I turned my grief for my wife into a shield for my son. The memory shifted, twisting into a nightmare. I saw Catherine's face again, but this time she was not looking at me with love. She was looking at me with horror. I looked down at myself in the dream. I was a skeleton wrapped in trash, bleeding into the snow. "Look at what your promise did, Doug," she seemed to say. "You did not raise a man. You raised a parasite. And now the parasite has consumed the host." A rat scuttled across my legs, jerking me back to reality. I gasped, sitting up and hitting my head on the concrete overhang. The hospital room vanished, leaving me back in the freezing hell of the underpass. I touched my face. My skin was on fire. I was dying. I knew the signs. If I did not get antibiotics and warmth within 24 hours, my heart would simply stop. I looked at the gray sky where the moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of smog. The irony was so sharp it felt like a knife in my gut. I had spent my life building a fortress around my son to keep him safe from the world. And in return, he had thrown me out into the cold to die alone so he could sell the bricks of that fortress. I tried to stand, but my legs refused to work. Tears, hot and angry, pricked at my eyes. "I am sorry, Catherine." I whispered, my voice raspy and broken. "I cannot keep that promise anymore. The boy you asked me to protect is dead. The thing living in my house in Chicago is a monster. And if I survive this night, I am not going to protect him. I am going to destroy him." The fever surged again, pulling me back into the darkness, but this time I did not fight it. I let the rage burn. It was the only thing keeping me warm. Waking up that morning felt less like rising from sleep, and more like being dug up from a shallow grave. My eyelashes were frozen together with rime, and when I tried to move my legs, my hip joint screamed with a pain so sharp it stole the breath from my lungs. But I was awake. The fever that had threatened to boil my brain the night before had broken, leaving me weak and shaking, but lucid. I stared at the gray concrete above my head. I was still in the alley. I was still a beggar. But I was not dead. I sat up, groaning as my stiff muscles protested. My hand brushed against my ankle and I felt it. A hard, small lump sewn into the thick hem of my trouser leg right against the bone. I froze. How could I have forgotten? The cold and the shock had scrambled my mind, but the fever breaking had cleared the fog. I was a Marine, and a Marine never deploys without a contingency plan. I had sewn it there the morning we left Chicago. Call it intuition. Call it the paranoia of an old man who has seen too much of the world's dark side. While Justin was packing his designer swim trunks and talking about the beaches of the Mediterranean, I had taken a needle and thread to my travel pants. I reached down, my fingers numb and clumsy with cold, and began to claw at the fabric. The thread was thick nylon fishing line, tough and durable. I had to bring my leg up to my mouth and use my teeth to tear at the stitching. It tasted like dirt and old sweat, but I did not stop. I ripped and pulled until the hem gave way. Something gold glinted in the dirty slush. I picked it up with a trembling hand. It was a simple band, thick and heavy, 24-karat gold, my wedding ring. I had told Justin I lost it in the garden 2 years ago. I lied. I kept it for emergencies. For a moment, I just held it, staring at the inscription inside. Forever. Catherine had slipped this on my finger 45 years ago in a small chapel in Wisconsin. It was the only piece of her I had left. It was supposed to be buried with me. The thought of selling it, of handing it over to some stranger in a pawn shop, made my stomach churn with nausea. It felt like a betrayal. It felt like I was selling her memory for a bus ticket. I closed my fist around the ring, squeezing it until it hurt. No. That was the old Douglas thinking. The sentimental old fool who let his son walk all over him. Catherine would not want me to die in a pile of Turkish garbage clutching a piece of metal. She would want me to survive. She would want me to fight. This ring was not jewelry anymore. It was ammunition. It was the price of admission back into the land of the living. I wiped the tears from my eyes with a dirty sleeve. I looked at the ring one last time, then shoved it deep into my pocket. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt dangerous. My son thought he had stripped me of all my assets. He thought he had taken my wallet, my cards, and my identity. But he forgot that gold is a universal language. I grabbed the wall and forced myself to stand up. My legs were shaky, but my resolve was iron. I had a ring. I had a target. And now I had a way to make the call that would end his life as he knew it. I limped out of the alley and into the morning light, not as a victim, but as a man on a mission. The district of Auxerre was a maze of crumbling concrete and shadows, where the desperate went to disappear. I walked with a limp that was becoming permanent, but my head was high. The morning sun did not reach the bottom of these narrow alleys where the air smelled of roasted chestnuts, diesel fumes, and unwashed bodies. I was looking for a specific kind of sign. Not a bank, not a jewelry store. I was looking for the 3 gold balls or the hand-painted signs that promised cash for gold with no questions asked. I found it tucked between a kebab stand and a shop selling counterfeit sneakers. The windows were barred, and the man behind the glass looked like he had not smiled since the 70s. I pushed open the heavy door. A bell chimed, sounding tinny and weak against the roar of the traffic outside. The shop smelled of stale tobacco and old dreams. The proprietor was a heavy-set man with oil stains on his shirt and eyes that assessed my worth in a nanosecond. He saw the rags. He saw the dirt on my face. He saw a desperate old beggar who probably stole something to get a fix. He did not know he was looking at a man who used to negotiate logistics contracts worth millions in the Middle East. I approached the counter and reached into my pocket. My hand was steady as I placed the heavy gold band on the scratched glass surface. The sound of the gold hitting the glass was the only noise in the room. The man picked it up. He squinted at the inscription inside. He weighed it in his palm. He pulled out a jeweler's loop and examined the rim. Then he dropped it back onto the counter with a dismissive clatter. $50, he grunted in broken English. Gold price down. Old ring. Scrap metal. I did not blink. I did not beg. I leaned forward, placing my dirty hands flat on the counter. My eyes locked onto his. That is 24-karat solid gold, I said, my voice low and gravelly. It weighs exactly 12 grams. The current market price for gold is $60 a gram. That ring is worth $700 in scrap alone. I am not asking for $700. But if you insult me with 50 again, I will walk down the street to your competitor and I will tell him you tried to cheat a veteran. The man froze. He looked at me again. Really looked at me this time. He looked past the filth and the bruises and saw the steel underneath. He saw the way I held myself. He realized I was not a junkie. I was a man on a mission. He grunted and picked up the ring again, putting it on a digital scale. It read 12.2 grams. He tapped the counter. $300, he said. Cash. I shook my head. 200, I said. But I need something else. I need a phone, a secure line, international call, 5 minutes, and I need privacy. The man laughed a dry, barking sound. He looked at the ring, then at the phone sitting on the wall behind him. It was an old landline, the kind that could not be tracked by GPS. It was perfect. Deal, he said. He opened the register and counted out a stack of greasy lira notes. I shoved the money into my pocket without counting it. I did not care about the cash. I could starve for another week if I had to. The food was not the fuel I needed. The phone was the weapon. He placed the receiver on the counter and walked into the back room, giving me my privacy. I picked up the heavy plastic handset. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a sound sweeter than any symphony. It was the sound of connection, the sound of power. I took a deep breath and dialed the number I had memorized 30 years ago. It was time to wake up the ghosts. The phone was a relic from the 90s, a beige block of plastic that smelled of stale cigarettes and onions. I held the receiver against my ear with a hand that was still shaking from the adrenaline of the transaction. The dial tone hummed a long, continuous note that sounded like a lifeline across the Atlantic. I closed my eyes and punched in the number. It was a number I had not called in 5 years, but my fingers remembered the pattern. It was the private line of Michael O'Connor. We had served in the Marines together in Da Nang and later built our businesses in Chicago side by side. He was the only man on earth who knew where the bodies were buried because he had helped me dig the holes. The line clicked and began to ring. 1 ring, 2 rings. My heart hammered against my ribs. If he did not answer, I was dead. If he had changed his number, I was dead. On the 4th ring, the line opened. A voice, gruff and suspicious, barked into the receiver. O'Connor. Who is this? I tried to speak, but my throat constricted. Hearing a familiar voice, a voice from home, broke something inside me. It was the first time in 3 days that I was not talking to a predator or a mark. I cleared my throat, forcing the weakness down. Mickey, I rasped. It is Doug. There was a silence on the other end, so profound, I thought the line had gone dead. Then I heard a sharp intake of breath. Doug. Douglas Bennett. Is that a joke? Who is this? Doug is in Europe. It is me, Mickey, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I am in Istanbul. I am at a pawn shop in Aksaray. Jesus Christ, Doug. Michael's voice shifted from suspicion to alarm. You sound like you have been gargling gravel. What happened? I called your house yesterday. Justin said you guys were island hopping in Greece. He said you were unreachable. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Greece. Of course. That was the cover story. No, Mickey, I said. I am not in Greece. I am in a back alley with no shoes and a fake name. The boy left me. He took my passport. He took my cards. He dumped me at the airport like an unwanted dog and flew home. There was a crashing sound on the other end, like a chair being knocked over. He did what? Michael roared. That little maggot. I am calling the State Department. I am calling the embassy. Stay right there, Doug. I will have a team on a plane in an hour. We are going to get the police involved. I will have Justin in cuffs before lunch. No. I shouted the word into the receiver, startling the shop owner in the front room. I lowered my voice. No police, Michael. Not yet. Do not call the embassy. Do not call the State Department. But Doug, he tried to kill you. This is attempted murder. I know what it is. I cut him off, my voice cold and hard. But if you call the police now, he gets a lawyer. He claims it was a misunderstanding. He claims I got lost. He gets a slap on the wrist and he keeps my money. I do not want him arrested, Mickey. Not yet. I want him destroyed. I took a deep breath, gripping the phone cord. I need you to do exactly what I say. As far as anyone knows, I am missing. Maybe I am dead. Let him believe it. Let him think he got away with it. When a man thinks he is safe, he gets sloppy. He makes mistakes. I want to watch him spend that money. I want to watch him dig his own grave. There was a long pause on the line. I could hear Michael breathing heavy and angry. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. What do you need, Marine? I need cash wired to a hawala broker here in the city, I said. 5,000. Untraceable. And I need eyes on my house. I need to know every move he makes, every dime he spends. Consider it done, Michael said. Welcome back from the dead Doug. I hung up the phone. I stood there in the dusty back room of a Turkish pawn shop, and for the first time since I landed in this hellhole, I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a ghost who had just declared war on the living. The fax machine in the corner of the pawn shop whirred to life, spitting out a single sheet of thermal paper. The shopkeeper picked it up and nodded slowly. He did not smile, but the suspicion in his eyes was replaced by a grudging respect. The transfer from Michael had cleared. In the underworld of Istanbul, money moves faster than light, and my friend had come through. The man reached into a rusted metal safe under the counter and pulled out a thick envelope. He counted the bills onto the glass. $5,000 in mixed currency, American bills and Turkish lira. I scooped up the cash. My hands were steady now. This was not charity. This was ammunition. I did not say thank you. In this world, gratitude is a weakness. I just nodded, turned on my heel, and walked out of the shop. The first thing I did was not eat. I could have devoured a horse, but there was something I needed more than food. I needed to wash the stench of failure off my skin. I found a cheap hotel 2 blocks away. The sign was missing letters, and the lobby smelled of stale tobacco, but it had a private bathroom. I paid for 3 nights in advance and locked the door behind me. I turned the shower knob as far as it would go. The pipes groaned and spat brown water before running clear and hot. I stripped off the filthy clothes I had worn for 4 days. The windbreaker, the torn trousers, the underwear that I had soiled in my sleep during the fever. I kicked them into the corner like they were infected. I stepped under the spray and let out a guttural groan as the scalding water hit my frozen skin. It stung like acid on my cuts and scrapes, but it felt like redemption. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw. I watched the water swirl down the drain, dark with the grime of the airport floor and the alleyway mud. I was washing away the victim. I was washing away the old man who had been tossed aside. After 30 minutes, I stepped out and wrapped a thin towel around my waist. I sat on the edge of the sagging bed and ate the kebab I had bought on the way up. The hot meat and spices burned my throat in the best way possible. I could feel the calories hitting my bloodstream, fueling my muscles, waking up my brain. I was no longer starving. I was no longer freezing. I was back in control. I stood up and walked to the cracked mirror above the sink. I wiped the steam away with my hand and stared at the reflection. The man looking back at me was a stranger. My face was gaunt, the cheekbones protruding like blades. There was a dark purple bruise blossoming around my left eye, where the vagrant had punched me. My beard was gray and jagged. I looked like a specter. I looked like death warmed over. But it was the eyes that scared me. The warmth was gone. The sparkle that used to appear when I talked about my son was extinguished. In its place was a flat, cold darkness. I touched the cold glass, tracing the line of my jaw. "Justin," I whispered to the reflection. "You wanted me to disappear. Well, you got your wish. Douglas Bennett. The father is gone. The thing standing in this room is a ghost, and ghosts have nothing left to lose. I turned away from the mirror. It was time to get to work. I spent the first $500 of Michael's money on a laptop. It was not a sleek machine, but a heavy black brick used by gamers and programmers. I carried it back to my hotel room like it was the nuclear football. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat at the wobbly desk. I plugged the machine into the wall and connected to the hotel Wi-Fi through a secure VPN that Michael had texted me. The screen glowed blue in the dim room, illuminating my bruised face. It was time to go home, or at least it was time to visit. I dialed Michael again on the burner phone. "I am online," I said. "Activate the Omega protocol." There was a pause on the line. I could hear Michael typing furiously on a keyboard 4,000 miles away. "You know, Douglas," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of admiration and worry. "I always told you that you were paranoid for installing those backup cameras. I told you that putting pinhole lenses in the smoke detectors and the motion sensors was overkill. I guess I owe you an apology." "Paranoia is just a word for being prepared," I muttered. "Justin thinks he is smart. He changed the front door code. He probably changed the Wi-Fi password. But he does not know about the hardwired system. He does not know that the house has eyes that run on an independent server." The screen in front of me flickered. A command prompt window opened, and lines of code scrolled past, faster than I could read. "Accessing server. Bypassing local firewall. Connection established." The screen blinked black for a second, and then split into a grid of 6 distinct video feeds. My heart hammered against my ribs. There it was. My living room in high definition. My kitchen. The hallway leading to the master bedroom. The garage. The image was grainy at first, due to the distance, but then it sharpened. I leaned in closer, my breath fogging the screen. The house looked the same, but it felt different. The lighting was too bright. The curtains were thrown wide open, something I never did at night. And then I saw movement. A figure walked into the frame of the living room camera. It was Justin. He was wearing my silk bathrobe, the one Catherine had given me for our 30th anniversary. He was holding a glass of my best scotch. He looked relaxed. He looked like the king of the castle. He flopped down onto the sofa, putting his feet up on the coffee table. My coffee table. A moment later, Brittany walked in. She was wearing a cocktail dress and holding a phone. She was laughing. I could not hear the audio yet, but I could see the way her body moved. She was triumphant. She walked over to the wall where my collection of antique maps hung. She reached up and tilted one of the frames, seemingly critiquing it. Then she said something to Justin, and they both threw their heads back in laughter. I plugged in my headphones and clicked the audio icon. The sound of their laughter filled my ears, tinny and distorted, but unmistakable. It was the sound of vultures picking a carcass clean. My hand hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hack into the smart speakers and shout at them to get out. But I stopped myself. No. That would just scare them. I did not want to scare them. I wanted to trap them. I hit the record button. The red dot appeared in the corner of the screen. Every sip of my scotch, every laugh, every movement was now being saved to a secure cloud server. I sat back in the chair in my cheap Istanbul hotel room and watched my son celebrate my murder. I was the audience to my own tragedy, but the final act was yet to be written. The blue light from the laptop screen was the only thing illuminating my hotel room in Istanbul. I sat perfectly still, my eyes locked on the grainy video feed streaming from 4,000 miles away. It is a strange feeling to attend your own funeral, especially when the people burying you are popping champagne corks. On the screen, my living room looked like a nightclub. Justin had opened the vintage Dom Perignon I had been saving for 20 years. It was the bottle I bought the day he graduated high school, the one I planned to open when his first child was born. Now he was chugging it straight from the bottle, spilling the sticky liquid onto the Persian rug Catherine had bought on our honeymoon. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and laughed. It was not the laugh of a grieving son. It was the laugh of a man who had just won the lottery. I adjusted the volume on my headphones. The microphone hidden inside the motion sensor was sensitive enough to pick up the fizz of the bubbles. Brittany was dancing around the room, spinning in circles with her arms wide open. "I cannot believe we finally did it," she squealed, her voice shrill and piercing. "I feel so light, Justin. I feel like 100-pound weight has been lifted off my shoulders." She flopped down onto the sofa, kicking her heels up onto the coffee table. My coffee table. The one I had built with my own hands. Justin walked over to her and sat down. He looked a little unsteady. "Do you think he is okay?" he asked. His voice was slurred. "I mean, do you think he found a shelter or something? It is pretty cold over there." For a second, just a fraction of a second, I hoped to see regret on his face. I hoped to see my son. But then Brittany leaned forward and put her hand on his knee. "Oh, stop it," she said, rolling her eyes. "Who cares? He is probably frozen solid on a park bench by now." I checked the weather app. It is -10 in Istanbul tonight. Think of it as a mercy baby. He was old. He was always complaining about his hip. He was miserable. We just sped up the inevitable. We did him a favor. Justin looked at her. He blinked slowly, processing her words. Then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "You are right," he said. "He was a burden. We are free now." He raised the bottle in a toast. "To us," he said. "To the house. To the $2 million. They clinked the bottle against a crystal glass and drank deep. I sat in my hotel room thousands of miles away and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply reached out with a steady hand and clicked the save button on the recording software. That 30-second clip was not just a video. It was a confession. It was proof of intent. It was the nail in their coffin. I watched them celebrate my death, and for the first time in my life I felt absolutely nothing for my son. The boy I raised was dead. The man on the screen was just a target. And I never miss a target. The camera feed switched to my private study, and the image that filled my laptop screen made my blood run cold. This room was my sanctuary. It was where I kept the medals I earned in Vietnam, and the photos of Catherine that I could not bear to hang in the hallway. Now it was a crime scene. Justin was standing by the heavy oak desk, wringing his hands while Brittany barked orders at a man in blue coveralls. He was a locksmith, and he was kneeling in front of my floor safe with a high-powered drill. I turned up the audio. The sound of the drill bit grinding against the hardened steel was deafening, even through the tinny laptop speakers. It sounded like a dentist drill boring into a rotten tooth. I watched the locksmith pause and wipe sweat from his forehead. He looked uncomfortable. I could see him glance at the framed photos on the wall, then back at Brittany. "Are you sure about this, ma'am?" he asked, shouting over the noise of the drill. "Usually I need to see a death certificate or a power of attorney for a job like this. This is a high-security unit." Brittany did not even blink. She smoothed her dress and put on her best grieving face. "I told you," she said, her voice thick with fake emotion. "My father-in-law passed away in Turkey 2 days ago. We are still waiting for the paperwork from the embassy, but we need to find his life insurance policy to pay for the body transport. Do you want him to rot in a foreign morgue just because you are worried about red tape?" The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost applauded. She had buried me before I was even dead. The locksmith nodded, clearly shamed by her performance, and leaned back into the drill. A moment later there was a loud metallic pop. The heavy steel door of the safe swung open with a groan. Justin let out a gasp that was audible over the microphone. He pushed the locksmith aside and fell to his knees in front of the open vault. He did not look for life insurance. He did not look for a will. His hands went straight for the velvet pouch where I kept the bearer bonds and the thick leather folder that held the property deed. He pulled them out, clutching them to his chest, like a starving man clutching a loaf of bread. "We got it," he whispered. "Brittany, we got it. The deed, the bonds. It is all here." Brittany shrieked with delight and began pulling out stacks of cash. My emergency fund. $10,000 in hundreds. She threw the money into the air, letting it rain down on them like confetti. I sat in that dark hotel room and watched them loot my life's work. I did not close my eyes. I did not look away. I made sure the recording software was capturing every pixel, every frame of their greed. They thought they were rich. They thought they had just unlocked their future. But as I watched Justin stuff the deed into his pocket, I knew the truth. They had not unlocked a fortune. They had just unlocked a prison cell. I saved the video file and named it Evidence A. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. The flight from Istanbul to JFK was 11 hours of white noise and darkness. I did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Justin's face smiling as he toasted to my death. I sat in seat 34B wedged between two strangers staring at the flight map as the little plane icon crawled across the Atlantic. I was not Douglas Bennett, the retired logistics manager, anymore. I was a weapon being deployed to a combat zone. When the wheels touched down on American soil, I did not feel relief. I felt a cold, grim purpose settling in my chest like concrete. I did not fly to Chicago. That would have been a tactical error. Justin would be watching the passenger manifests for O'Hare, hoping for a body, or fearing a return. I landed in New York instead. I walked through customs with a temporary travel document that Michael's contact at the embassy had expedited for me. The officer stamped it without looking up. He did not see the rage burning behind my eyes. He just saw a tired old man in cheap clothes. I took a cab straight to a brownstone in Brooklyn. It was the office of Arthur Walsh, the only lawyer I trusted with my life. He was waiting for me in his library, a room filled with the smell of old paper and cigar smoke. When I walked in, Walsh dropped his pen. He stood up slowly, his mouth opening in shock. "My God." "Doug," he whispered, coming around the desk. "You look like you walked out of a gulag." I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of his window. He was right. The last week had aged me 10 years. My skin was gray and papery, drawn tight over my cheekbones. The bruise on my eye had faded to a sickly yellow-green. I had lost 15 pounds. My clothes, the ones I bought in Istanbul, hung off my frame like rags on a scarecrow. But when I looked at Walsh, I did not smile. "Cut the pleasantries, Arthur," I said, my voice rough from the dry airplane air. "We have work to do. Did you get the files Michael sent?" Walsh nodded quickly, regaining his composure. He poured me a glass of water, his hands shaking slightly. "I got them," he said. "The video of the safe being drilled. The recording of them talking about the insurance money. Doug, this is airtight. We can go to the police right now. We can have them arrested for theft, fraud, and elder abuse before dinner." I took a sip of the water, letting the cool liquid soothe my throat. "No," I said, setting the glass down with a sharp click. "No police, not yet. Arresting them is too easy. They will get bail. They will get a sob story about how they were desperate. I do not want them in a cell, Arthur. I want them broken. I want them to feel every ounce of fear I felt in that alleyway." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled list I had written on the plane. "I want you to execute the contingency clause in the property deed," I said. "The one we wrote 5 years ago. The one that transfers the title to the Veterans Charity in the event of my death or incapacitation." Walsh looked at the paper, then back at me. "But Doug," he said, his legal mind trying to catch up, "you are not dead, and if you transfer the title, you lose the house too." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. I do not care about the house, Arthur. It is just wood and brick. I care about the lesson. Do it. And then I want you to pull the records on Justin's gambling debts. I am going to buy his freedom. And then I am going to foreclose on his life. Walsh looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. He saw it too. The Douglas Bennett he knew was gone. The man sitting in his office was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Walsh slid a single sheet of paper across the polished mahogany desk. It made a dry, rasping sound that seemed to echo in the silent library. I picked it up. It was a general power of attorney document, giving Justin full legal authority over my assets, my bank accounts, and my medical decisions. I looked at the bottom of the page. There was my signature. Douglas Edward Bennett, written in blue ink with the slightly heavy slant that I had used for 50 years. It was a masterpiece of forgery. If I did not know better, I would have sworn I signed it myself. I looked at the date stamp next to the notary seal. October 15th. My blood ran cold. On October 15th, I was in the hospital getting my hip examined. Justin had driven me there. He had sat in the waiting room while I was under sedation. He must have brought a notary friend, or maybe he just bribed someone. While I was unconscious, trusting him with my life, he was literally stealing my identity. He has been busy, Walsh said, his voice low and disgusted. He filed this with the county clerk the morning you left for Istanbul. And 20 minutes later, he listed the house. Walsh opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. It was a listing on a popular real estate website. There was my home, the house I built brick by brick, the garden where Catherine grew her roses, the porch where I smoked my cigars. It was all there, reduced to a few digital pixels, but it was the price that made me grip the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. $1.8 million. That house is appraised at $2.5 million, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He is selling it for scrap. He is doing a fire sale, Doug Walsh explained. The listing specifies cash buyers only and a 7-day closing period. He does not want top dollar. He wants fast money. He is trying to liquidate the asset before anyone realizes you are missing. He has already accepted a preliminary offer from a developer who wants to tear it down and build condos. Tear it down. The words hit me harder than the physical blow in the alley. That house was not just an asset. It was a museum of my life. The height marks on the kitchen doorframe where we measured Justin growing up. The loose floorboard in the hallway that Catherine always promised to fix. Justin was not just selling a building. He was erasing our history. He was willing to let a bulldozer crush his mother's memory just to get his hands on a pile of cash. I looked back at the forged signature. I traced the loops of the letters with my thumb. He practiced, I said. He must have spent hours tracing my signature while I was sleeping upstairs. He planned this for months. Walsh nodded. It is grand larceny, Doug. It is fraud. It is forgery. With this document, we can put him away for 20 years. I shook my head slowly, pushing the paper back across the desk. No, I said. Prison is too impersonal. If we arrest him now, the sale stops, but he stays in the house until the trial. He gets a public defender. He plays the victim. I want him to feel the walls closing in. I want him to believe he has succeeded. I looked at the real estate listing one last time. Let the sale proceed, I said. Let him think the money is coming. Let him pack his bags. Let him dream about spending that $1.8 million. Because when he reaches for the check, I want to be the one to slap his hand away. The fall hurts more when you are standing on the edge of victory. Walsh closed the laptop. He looked terrified. He looked excited. He picked up the phone to make the call that would set the trap. The mystery of the forged signature was solved, but the motive was still a blur. Why the rush? Why the fire sale price? Justin had always been greedy, but he was also lazy. To risk a felony charge for fraud required a kind of desperation I had never seen in him. Then my phone buzzed. It was Michael. He had sent a secure file to Walsh's computer. The subject line read simply, "The Smoking Gun." Walsh clicked it open, and a spreadsheet filled the screen. It was a forensic accounting of my son's life for the past 6 months, and it looked like a car crash in slow motion. I leaned in, squinting at the columns of red numbers. It started back in May. Justin had emptied his joint savings account with Brittany. Then he maxed out 3 credit cards. Then he took a personal line of credit. And every single cent had been funneled into a cryptocurrency exchange platform based in the Cayman Islands. He was not investing. He was gambling. He was betting the farm on high-risk altcoins that promised to turn $1,000 into $1 million overnight. Instead, they turned his life savings into dust. Walsh scrolled down to the bottom of the page. The graph was a steep nosedive. By September, he was wiped out. But he did not stop there. That is when the deposits from unknown sources started appearing. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. The names on the transfers were shell companies. Titan Holdings, Red Star LLC. "Who are these guys?" Walsh asked, pointing at the screen. "I know them," I said, my voice cold. "Or at least I know the type." "That is not a bank, Arthur. That is the street." Justin borrowed from loan sharks. Michael had included a note at the bottom of the file. It confirmed my worst fears. The debt was held by a syndicate operating out of the South Side. These were not the kind of people who sent polite letters when you missed a payment. These were people who broke fingers first and asked questions later. The total principal was $150,000. With the VIG, the weekly interest, he was looking at a debt that was growing faster than he could ever pay. Suddenly, everything made sense. The trip to Turkey, the abandoned airport gate, the forged power of attorney. He was not just trying to get rich. He was trying to stay alive. He needed the cash from the house sale not to buy a yacht, but to keep his kneecaps intact. He had 7 days to pay them back, or they would come collecting in blood. I stared at the screen at the ruin of my son's financial life. A part of me, the father part, wanted to weep. I had tried to teach him about hard work, about slow, steady growth. I taught him that there are no shortcuts. But he had ignored it all for the lure of easy money. Now he was cornered like a rat. But the other part of me, the part that had been left to freeze in Istanbul, saw an opportunity. This debt was his weakness, but it could be my weapon. I looked up at Walsh. "Find out who holds the paper," I said. "I do not care which gang it is. I do not care if it is the mafia or a biker gang. Everyone has a price. Contact them through a third party. Tell them there is a buyer for Justin Bennett's debt." Walsh looked at me, his eyes wide. "You are going to pay it off?" he asked. "You are going to save him again?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "No, Arthur. I am not going to save him. I am going to own him. If I buy that debt, I become the shark. And when he opens that door expecting to see a killer, he is going to see his father. And I promise you, he will wish it was the killer. Buy the debt, Arthur. Every single cent of it." The wire transfer took exactly 10 seconds to process. $152,400. That was the number on the screen. It was every cent I had left in my liquid retirement accounts. That money was the accumulation of 40 years of waking up at 5 in the morning and working until my back screamed. It was supposed to be for my twilight years. It was supposed to pay for fishing trips to the Keys and a comfortable nursing home when my legs finally gave out. Instead, I just sent it into the dark web of offshore accounts to pay off a syndicate of criminals. Walsh sat across from me, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. He had just negotiated the purchase of a high-risk, distressed asset from a group of men who usually collected payments with baseball bats. To them, Justin was a bad investment. He was a flight risk and a loser who was drowning in interest. They were thrilled to take the cash and wash their hands of him. They did not care who the buyer was. They did not know that the new owner of the debt was the father the boy had left for dead. The printer on the desk hummed and spat out the assignment of debt contract. It was a clean legal document that sanitized a dirty reality. I picked it up, feeling the warmth of the fresh ink. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was from a surge of power so intense it felt like a drug. I looked at the creditor line. It did not say Douglas Bennett. It said Phoenix Recovery Services, LLC. A shell company Walsh had registered for me in Delaware 10 minutes ago. I ran my thumb over Justin's signature on the loan agreement. He had signed his life away for a chance at easy money. He thought he was borrowing from faceless gangsters who would just break his legs if he did not pay. He did not realize he had just sold his soul to me. I now owned his fear. I owned his sleepless nights. I owned the air he breathed. If he missed a payment, I could legally seize his assets. I could garnish his future wages. I could drag him into court and expose his fraud to the world. Walsh looked at me warily. "You know this is madness, Doug," he said softly. "You just spent your life savings to buy a toxic debt. You will never see that money again. You are throwing good money after bad." I looked at him and smiled a smile that felt tight and foreign on my face. "You are wrong, Arthur," I said. "I am not looking for a return on investment. I am paying for control. This piece of paper is a leash, and I am about to pull it tight." I folded the contract and placed it carefully into the inside pocket of my jacket, right next to my heart. It felt heavier than the gun I used to carry in the service. It was a weapon of mass destruction aimed at one specific target. I stood up and buttoned my coat. The paperwork was done. The trap was baited. The legal framework was solid. Now came the hard part. I had to go back to the house that was no longer mine and face the son who was no longer mine. I walked out of the office and into the New York traffic, ready to begin the final journey home. The drive from New York to Chicago is 12 hours of flat gray highway, but I made it in 10. I rented a rusted Ford pickup truck from a shady lot in Jersey because I needed to look like a contractor, not a ghost. I wanted to blend in with the background. I drank black coffee that tasted like battery acid and listened to the tires hum against the asphalt. Every mile marker was a countdown. Every exit sign was bringing me closer to the moment of truth. By the time I hit the outskirts of Chicago, the sky had turned a bruised purple and the snow was coming down hard. It was fitting. I left in a snowstorm and I was coming back in one. I turned onto Maple Street just after 8 in the evening. This was the street where I taught Justin to ride a bike without training wheels. This was the street where I walked Catherine in her wheelchair during her final months, pointing out the cardinals in the trees. It used to look like a Norman Rockwell painting to me. Safe, warm, welcoming. Now it looked like a battlefield. The houses were dark fortifications against the cold. The bare trees looked like skeletal fingers pointing accusations at the sky. I drove slowly, my headlights cutting through the swirling flakes until I saw it. Number 402. My house. I did not pull into the driveway. That would have been amateur. I parked 2 blocks down, tucked behind a massive oak tree that blocked me from view but gave me a clear line of sight. I killed the engine. The silence rushed in, filling the cab of the truck. I stared through the windshield and felt my heart stop for a second. There it was. Staked into the front lawn right in the middle of the frozen flower bed I had planted 20 years ago. A wooden sign. For sale. Seeing it in a picture on a laptop screen was one thing. Seeing it in real life was a physical violation. It was a white and red sign swinging slightly in the wind. It looked like a price tag on a piece of meat. Above it, a smaller rider hung down with the words "Sale Pending" in bold letters. They had moved fast. They had found a buyer who wanted to tear it down, and they were rushing to close the deal before the corpse in Turkey could thaw out. I watched the house. The lights were on downstairs. The golden glow of the chandelier in the dining room spilled out onto the snow. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. They were in there. Justin and Brittany. They were walking on my floors, eating off my plates, probably laughing about how easy it had been. They looked so warm, so safe. They had no idea that there was a wolf sitting in a truck 200 yards away. They had no idea that the man they thought was dead was watching them breathing the same air, must counting down the minutes. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up the file folder containing the debt contract and the deed transfer. I checked my watch. The lights were on, which meant they were awake. It was time to go home. I watched the red taillights of Justin's leased BMW disappear down the snowy street. They were driving fast, eager to get to whatever overpriced bar they had chosen to celebrate their victory. They thought they had pulled off the perfect crime. They had sold the house, they had ditched the body, and now they were going out to toast their new fortune. I waited until the street was silent again before I opened the truck door. The cold air hit me, but I barely felt it. I had been cold for a week. This was just weather. I walked up the driveway, limping slightly on my bad hip. The snow crunched under my boots, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet neighborhood. I walked right past the front door. I could see the blue glow of a new digital keypad lock. Justin had changed the codes, of course. He probably thought that was clever. He relied on technology to keep him safe. He forgot that I built this house. I knew its bones. I knew its secrets. I went around to the back of the house to the old bulkhead doors that led to the basement. It was a service entrance we never used, hidden behind a row of overgrown holly bushes. Justin was lazy. He never did yard work, and he certainly never checked the perimeter. I reached under the rusted lip of the metal doorframe. My fingers brushed against cold steel and then found it. A small magnetic key box I had placed there 15 years ago. It was covered in grime and spiderwebs, but it was still there. I slid the key into the padlock. It turned with a stiff grind. I lifted the heavy door and slipped into the darkness of the basement. The smell hit me first. Must and old laundry detergent. It was the smell of home. I climbed the wooden stairs, slowly listening for any sound, but the house was silent as a tomb. I opened the door at the top of the stairs and stepped into the kitchen. It felt like walking into a stranger's house. The counters were cluttered with empty wine bottles and takeout containers. My coffee maker was gone, replaced by a fancy espresso machine. I walked into the hallway. The walls were bare. The pictures of Catherine, the photos of Justin graduating from boot camp, they were all gone. He had erased me. He had scrubbed the house clean of my existence to make it ready for the next owner. I walked into the study. The door to my gun cabinet was ajar. I opened it. Most of my collection was gone, probably pawned weeks ago, but he had left one. My old Remington 870 shotgun. It was too heavy and too old-fashioned for him to bother with. I checked the chamber. It was empty. That was fine. I did not need bullets. I just needed the weight of it in my hands. I carried the gun into the living room and walked over to my leather armchair. It was the only piece of furniture he hadn't moved, probably because it was too heavy. I sat down. The leather groaned under my weight, a familiar sound that welcomed me back. I did not turn on the lamps. I did not close the curtains. I just sat there in the shadows, the shotgun resting across my lap, facing the front door. The digital clock on the VCR glowed green. 9:15. They would be back soon. I rested my head back and closed my eyes, breathing in the silence. I was the monster under the bed. I was the ghost in the machine. And I was ready to say hello. The headlights swept across the living room ceiling, like searchlights in a prison yard. I sat in the dark, perfectly still, my breathing shallow and controlled. I heard the crunch of tires on the snow in the driveway, then the slam of car doors. They were loud. They were sloppy. The sound of their laughter drifted through the front window, muffled by the glass, but unmistakable. It was the sound of people who thought they had won the lottery. It was the sound of people who thought the world belonged to them. I heard the heavy footsteps on the porch. Then came the electronic beeping of the keypad lock. Beep, beep, beep. Then a buzz. Incorrect code. Justin was too drunk to remember the sequence he had set himself. I heard Brittany giggle and say something about him being useless. Beep, beep, beep. Click. The mechanical whir of the deadbolt sliding back was the loudest sound in the world. The front door swung open, and a blast of freezing wind rushed into the house, carrying the smell of stale champagne and expensive perfume. They tumbled into the hallway, arm in arm, stumbling over the threshold. Brittany was wearing a white fur coat that probably cost more than my first car. Justin was red-faced and grinning, his tie loosened around his neck. "We did it, baby," he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty house. "We are free. $2 million. Can you believe it? We are going to be living like kings." Brittany laughed and spun around, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "It is over, Justin. The old man is gone. The house is sold. It is finally just us." Justin reached out and slapped his hand against the wall, searching for the light switch. I gripped the stock of the Remington 870. The wood was warm against my palm. I had a rag in my other hand, slowly polishing the steel barrel. I did not look up, I just waited. Click. The overhead chandelier blazed to life, flooding the room with a harsh yellow light. It took a second for their eyes to adjust. Justin was still smiling, his hand still on the switch. He turned his head, expecting to see an empty living room ready to be packed into boxes. Instead, he saw me. The scream that started in Brittany's throat died before it could make a sound. She froze, her mouth hanging open, her eyes bulging out of her head like she was seeing a demon from hell. Justin turned pale. All the blood drained from his face in a single heartbeat, leaving him looking like a wax figure. He staggered back, dropping his keys. They hit the floor with a jingle that sounded like a funeral bell. I did not stand up. I did not yell. I simply ran the oily rag down the length of the shotgun barrel one last time. The sound of the cloth sliding over the metal was a soft hiss in the terrified silence. I looked up slowly, locking eyes with my son. I saw the terror there. I saw the confusion. I saw the guilt. I smiled. It was the same cold smile I had worn in the trenches 50 years ago. "Oh, you are back," I said, my voice calm and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "I have a surprise for you." "Welcome home, son." Justin looked like he was going to vomit on his expensive Italian leather shoes. He grabbed the doorframe for support, his knuckles turning white as he stared at me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. He was in shock. His brain could not process the image of his father sitting in his favorite chair, holding a shotgun, when he was supposed to be a frozen corpse in a Turkish morgue. But Brittany was a different breed of predator. She recovered fast. I watched the fear in her eyes harden into something sharp and ugly. She realized I was not a hallucination. I was flesh and blood. And more importantly, I was an inconvenience. She stepped in front of Justin, physically shielding him, but not out of love. She wanted to take charge. She dropped her fur coat onto the floor and pointed a manicured finger at my face. Her voice was not trembling. It was a screech of pure entitlement. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" she yelled. "Put that gun down, Douglas. You are insane. You are absolutely insane." I did not move a muscle. I just watched her. It was fascinating to see the audacity of this woman. She had left me to die 3 days ago, and now she was scolding me for sitting in my own living room. "You have no right to be here," she continued, her voice rising an octave. "Look at you. You look like a bum. You broke into our house. That is breaking and entering, Douglas. That is a felony. Justin finally found his voice. It was a weak, pathetic whisper. Dad, he stammered. Dad, we thought you stayed behind because you wanted to. We thought you were. Shut up, Justin, Brittany snapped, cutting him off. Do not talk to him. He is dangerous. Look at him. He is holding a weapon. She turned back to me, her eyes blazing. You need to leave. Right now. Get your dirty boots off my hardwood floors and get out. I shifted slightly in the chair, and the leather creaked. Brittany flinched, but she held her ground. You do not seem to understand the situation, Douglas, she spat. This is not your house anymore. We sold it. The papers were signed electronically this morning. The wire transfer is pending. The new owners take possession on Monday. You are trespassing on private property. You do not live here. You do not own this. You are nothing but a squatter. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking now, but it was from rage, not fear. I am calling the police, she announced, holding the phone up like a shield. I am going to tell them that a senile old man has broken into our home and is threatening us with a gun. They will put you in a psych ward, Douglas. They will lock you up and throw away the key. And this time no one is coming to get you. I looked at the phone in her hand. The screen glowed, illuminating her twisted face. She actually believed it. She believed that a piece of paper and a digital signature gave her the moral high ground. She thought the law was a tool she could use to sweep me under the rug. Go ahead, I said softly, speaking for the first time since my greeting. Call them. But before you dial, let me show you what I brought back from New York. I reached for the file folder on the table next to me. Brittany paused, her thumb hovering over the dial button. She looked at the folder, then back at me. Curiosity warred with her anger. What is that? She demanded. Is that your will? Because if it is, we already have a copy. No, I said, tossing the folder onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy slap. It is not a will. It is an eviction notice. But not for me. Brittany snatched the manila folder from the coffee table like a vulture tearing at a carcass. She ripped it open, her long nails tearing the edge of the paper. Justin leaned over her shoulder, his eyes darting between me and the document, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. I sat back and watched the color drain from Brittany's face. It started at her neck and moved up to her hairline until she looked like she had seen a ghost. Her hands began to shake, not with anger this time, but with pure, unadulterated panic. She flipped the page, then flipped it back, reading the same paragraph over and over again, as if hoping the words would change. What is this? She whispered, her voice trembling. What is a quitclaim deed to the Veterans Support Foundation? What does this mean, Douglas? I took a slow sip of the whiskey I had poured myself earlier, enjoying the burn in my throat. It means you are standing on charity property, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. You see, when I landed in New York yesterday, I had a long meeting with my lawyer, Arthur Walsh. We executed a standing contingency clause in my estate planning. In the event of my disappearance or incapacitation, or in this case, my sudden return from the dead, the title of this property automatically transfers to the foundation. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I do not own this house, and neither do you. Justin made a noise that sounded like a dying animal. He grabbed the paper from Brittany's hands, staring at the official county stamp on the bottom. But Dad, he stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. We sold it. The contract. The developer. The money is in escrow. We have a deal. The contract is void, I said, cutting him off. You cannot sell what you do not own, son. That electronic signature you forged this morning is worth less than toilet paper. That developer is going to be very angry when his lawyer calls him in the morning to tell him the deal is dead. And that wire transfer you were waiting for. That $1.8 million you were already spending in your head. It is never coming. The house is gone, Justin. Poof. Just like that. Brittany dropped to her knees, scrambling to pick up the pages that had scattered across the floor. "You gave it away," she screeched. "You gave a $2 million house to a bunch of strangers, just to spite us. You are sick. You are a sick old man." "I gave it to men who would never leave a brother behind at an airport," I replied. "I gave it to men who understand loyalty, unlike my own family." And here is the best part, Brittany. Since the house is now the property of a non-profit organization, you are currently trespassing. If you are not out by the time the new owners arrive to inspect the property, they will have the sheriff remove you. And trust me, the Veterans Charity is not as patient as I am. Justin collapsed onto the sofa, his legs giving out beneath him. He looked at the walls around him, the walls he thought would save him from his gambling debts, and he realized they were closing in. He had traded his father for a fortune, and ended up with neither. I watched him bury his face in his hands and begin to rock back and forth. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. But I was not done yet. I had taken the roof over his head. Now it was time to take the ground beneath his feet. The silence in the living room was heavy enough to crush a man, but Justin was not done fighting yet. I could see the gears turning in his panic-stricken mind. The house was gone. The deal with the developer was dead. But he still had a lifeline. Or so he thought. He remembered the cash he had siphoned from my savings. He remembered the $500,000 he had stolen from my retirement fund before he left me at the airport. That was his escape hatch. If he had that money, he could run. He could leave Brittany, he could leave the debt, he could disappear. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers sliding over the screen. I watched him tap the icon for the banking app. The blue light of the screen illuminated his face, making him look like a ghost. He waited for the facial recognition to log him in. I took another sip of my drink and checked my watch. The fraud alert should have propagated through the system about 4 hours ago. Justin frowned. He tapped the screen again, harder this time. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, load." The little loading wheel spun and spun, mocking him. Then it stopped. A red notification box popped up on the screen. It was bright enough that I could see the reflection of the error message in his eyes. "What is wrong?" Brittany snapped, wiping her tears. "Why are you staring at the phone?" "Transfer the money, Justin. Move it to the offshore account now before he freezes it." "I cannot," Justin whispered. His voice was trembling. It says account frozen. Contact fraud department. Reference code red." He looked up at me, terror flooding his face. "What did you do?" he screamed. "What did you do to my accounts?" "I did not do anything to your accounts," I replied calmly. "I simply protected my own. You see, when I was in Istanbul right after I bought that laptop, I made a call to the bank's global fraud division. I told them that my identity had been compromised. I told them that my passport and cards were stolen by a family member who was attempting to liquidate my assets." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Banks are funny institutions, Justin. They do not like liability. As soon as I said the word fraud, they locked everything down. My accounts. Your accounts. The joint accounts you share with Brittany. Every single penny that has my name or your name attached to it is currently sitting in a digital vault that no one can open." Brittany let out a shriek and grabbed her own phone. She frantically tried to log into her credit card app. Declined. She tried her checking account. Locked. She tried to transfer funds from her savings. Access denied. "You cut us off," she screamed, throwing her phone onto the sofa. "We have zero access. I have $200 in my purse. That is it. That is all we have." "Correction," I said, holding up a finger. "You have $0, because that cash in your purse is technically evidence in a federal investigation. You see, the bank is now auditing every transaction from the last 6 months to determine the extent of the theft. They are going to see the crypto transfers. They are going to see the payments to the shell companies. And while they investigate, which can take months by the way you two are penniless, Justin stared at his phone as if it had turned into a snake. He tapped the screen again and again, praying for a glitch, praying for a different result. But the red box remained. Account frozen. He was not just broke. He was financially paralyzed. He could not buy a plane ticket. He could not rent a hotel room. He could not even buy a burger at a drive-thru. I stood up slowly, the floorboards creaking under my boots. "You wanted my money so bad, Justin," I said, looking down at him. "You wanted it all. Well, now it is safe, safer than it has ever been, and you cannot touch a dime of it. You are stranded, son, just like you stranded me, but at least you have a roof over your head. Oh, wait. No, you do not have that either." The red notification box on the phone screen was the spark that finally ignited the powder keg. Brittany did not cry. Crying implies sadness, and Brittany was incapable of sadness, only fury. She looked at Justin, the man she had promised to love in sickness and in health, and she saw the architect of her ruin. The mask of the sophisticated suburban wife dropped completely, revealing the feral creature underneath. She lunged at him with a speed, that was terrifying to watch. It was not a slap. It was a clawing, frantic attack. Her nails, the ones she had just spent $200 getting manicured, dug into his cheeks, leaving angry red welts. "You useless idiot," she screamed. "You promised me. You said this was foolproof. You said the old man was handled." She shoved him backward, and he tripped over his own feet, crashing into the side table. A heavy ceramic lamp shattered against the floor, sending shards of pottery flying, but nobody flinched. Brittany stood over him, her chest heaving, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "I married a loser!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with the strain. "A spineless, pathetic loser. I should have listened to my mother. I should have left you years ago. You cannot do anything right, Justin. You cannot make money. You cannot hold a job. You cannot even kill your own father properly." That line hung in the air. You cannot even kill your own father properly. It was the truth, stripped of all pretense. I sat there in my leather armchair and took a slow, measured sip of my whiskey. The ice clinked against the glass, a delicate musical sound in the middle of the domestic violence. I felt like I was sitting in the front row of a theater, watching a tragedy reach its climax. But I did not feel pity. I did not feel the urge to step in and save my son from his harpy of a wife. I just watched. Justin cowered on the floor, shielding his face with his hands. He was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook his body. He looked small. He looked weak. "Stop it, Brittany," he whimpered. "Please stop. It is not my fault. He tricked us." Brittany kicked him in the shin. It was a vicious, spiteful kick. "Do not you dare blame him," she yelled. "He is an old man. He was half dead in an airport. You are 35 years old, and you let him outsmart you. You ruined my life, Justin. You dragged me into this. We are homeless. We are broke. And it is all because you are too stupid to finish the job." I swirled the amber liquid in my glass and took another drink. The scotch tasted smooth and expensive. The scene playing out before me was ugly and violent, but to me it was justice. It was the inevitable result of a relationship built on greed instead of respect. Rats always turn on each other when the ship starts to sink. I leaned back in the chair, getting comfortable. I had walked through snow and slept in trash to see this. I was not going to interrupt the show. I was going to let them tear each other apart until there was nothing left but the truth. The violence in the living room was cut short by a sound that stopped time. It was not a polite tap. It was 3 heavy rhythmic blows against the solid oak of the front door. Boom, boom, boom. The entire house seemed to vibrate with the force of it. Brittany froze, her hand still raised to strike Justin again. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of the wind howling outside. Justin turned his head slowly toward the door. His eyes were wide, dilated with a primal terror that went far beyond the fear of losing money. He looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. It was 10:15 at night. He knew what that meant. The grace period on his loan had expired at midnight yesterday. He had ignored the calls. He had ignored the texts. Now the collections department had arrived in person. "They are here," he whispered. The words came out as a strangled squeak. "Oh God, they are actually here." Brittany lowered her hand, looking confused. "Who is here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is it the police? Did the neighbors call the cops because of the yelling?" Justin shook his head violently. "No," he gasped. "It is not the police. It is them. The investors, the guys from the south side." Another series of knocks hammered against the door, louder this time. Boom, boom, boom. The door frame rattled in its setting. It sounded like a battering ram. It sounded like Judgment Day. Justin scrambled backward on the floor, his expensive shoes slipping on the polished wood. He did not crawl toward his wife. He crawled toward me. The man who had abandoned me at an airport to die was now dragging himself across the floor to kneel at my feet. He grabbed the leg of my trousers, his grip desperate and sweaty. "Dad," he begged, his voice cracking into a sob. "Dad, you have to help me. You have the gun. You have the shotgun. Don't let them in. Please, Dad. They are going to kill me. They said they would break my legs if I didn't have the cash by Tuesday." "It is Tuesday, Dad." I looked down at him. He looked pathetic. A grown man cowering on the floor, clutching his father's leg like a frightened toddler. The irony was so rich, I could taste it. He had spent months plotting to steal my life, and now he was begging me to save his. "Who is at the door, Justin?" I asked, calmly swirling the ice in my glass. "Who are you so afraid of? Is it your friends? The ones you borrowed the crypto money from?" He nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the blood from where Brittany had scratched him. "Yes," he cried. "I owe them $150,000. I thought when we sold the house I could pay them back. But the money is gone. The house is gone. If they come in here and find out I am broke, they are going to kill me. Dad, please. You are a Marine. You know how to handle this. Stand up. Go to the door. Tell them to leave." The knocking stopped for a moment. Then the doorknob began to turn. Slowly. Deliberately. The lock clicked. Justin let out a high-pitched shriek and buried his face in my lap. He was shaking so hard the chair vibrated. He expected monsters. He expected men with baseball bats and knives. He expected pain. I looked at the door as it swung open, revealing the dark, snowy night and the silhouettes of 3 men standing on the porch. I took one last sip of my scotch. I didn't need to stand up. I didn't need to raise my voice. Because the monsters outside weren't here for me. They were working for me. The wind from the open door swirled around the room, blowing snow onto the hardwood floor, but the men standing in the doorway were not carrying baseball bats. They were carrying briefcases. There were 3 of them. In the center stood Michael O'Connor. He was a mountain of a man, wearing a cashmere overcoat that cost more than Justin's car, and his face was carved from granite. He looked like a statue of judgment. Flanking him were 2 younger men in sharp navy suits holding thick leather portfolios. They did not look like thugs from the South Side. They looked like the kind of lawyers who charge $1,000 an hour to ruin your life. Justin stopped shaking. He looked up from my lap, his eyes darting between the men and me. Confusion replaced the terror on his face. He scrambled to his feet, wiping the snot from his nose with his sleeve. Who are these guys?" he stammered. "Are they federal agents? Is this about the bank fraud?" Michael stepped into the room. He did not look at Justin. He did not look at Brittany, who was cowering by the fireplace. He walked straight to me and nodded. His expression was grim and professional. "It is done, Douglas," he said, his voice deep and rumbling like a subterranean engine. "The transfer is finalized. The original creditors have accepted the buyout. They have relinquished all claims. You are the sole holder of the note." I nodded and set my whiskey glass down on the side table. "Thank you, Michael," I said. I stood up slowly, stretching my bad leg. I walked over to Justin, who was looking at Michael with a mix of awe and bewilderment. "You thought the wolves were at the door," I said, my voice quiet and hard. "You thought you were going to get your legs broken. Well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that the syndicate is gone. You do not owe the mob a single penny anymore." Justin let out a breath that sounded like a balloon deflating. He slumped against the wall, closing his eyes. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh, thank God. Dad, I knew you would fix it. I knew you would not let them hurt me. I am so sorry. I will pay you back, I swear. I will get a job. I will fix this." I laughed. It was a sharp barking sound that made his eyes snap open. "You are misunderstanding the situation, son. I did not pay your debt to save you. I purchased it." I reached out and took a document from one of the lawyers. I held it up so he could see the bold text at the top. "Assignment of debt." I bought the paper, Justin. I bought the principal. I bought the interest. And most importantly, I bought the terms. As of midnight tonight, you do not owe the Southside Syndicate $150,000. You owe me $150,000. Justin stared at the paper, his mouth hanging open. But you are my father." "No," I said, stepping closer until I was inches from his face. "I am your creditor, and I am not a generous one. The terms of the original loan remain in effect. That means the interest rate is still 20% compounded weekly. That is the street rate, Justin. That is the shark rate. And since you have no assets, no home, and no income, you are in default the moment I sign this." Brittany stepped forward, her face pale. "You cannot do that," she hissed. "That is illegal. You cannot charge us usury rates. That is predatory lending." I turned to her and smiled, cold and humorless. "Take me to court, then. Please. I would love to explain to a judge how my son forged my signature, stole my identity, and gambled away his future. I think a jury would be very interested in the full story. But until then, the clock is ticking. You are in deep water, children, and I am the only one with a boat." I walked over to the fireplace and turned my back to the cold room, looking at the empty grate where a fire should have been burning. The silence stretched out thin and tight like a wire about to snap. I could hear Justin's ragged breathing and the soft click of Brittany's nails digging into the leather sofa. They were waiting for the axe to fall. They knew it was coming. They just did not know how deep the cut would be. I turned around and faced them. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, absolute authority of a man who holds the keys to the kingdom. "You are at a crossroads," I said, looking directly at my son. "There are two paths out of this room tonight, and neither of them leads back to your old life. That life is dead. It died the moment you drove away from the airport." I held up one finger. Option 1 is the legal route. Michael has already prepared the file for the district attorney. It is thick, Justin. Attempted manslaughter for abandoning a vulnerable adult in a foreign country. Wire fraud for the unauthorized bank transfers. Aggravated identity theft for the forged deed and power of attorney. And since you crossed state lines and used international banking systems, the FBI gets involved. That is federal prison, son. I let that sink in. I watched him picture it. 15 years minimum, I continued. No parole for the first 10. You will be locked in a cage with men who will look at you and see prey. You are soft, Justin. You have never fought for anything in your life. You will not survive a month in federal lockup. And Brittany, you are an accessory after the fact. You signed the papers too. You spent the money. You will be in the women's penitentiary right down the road. You can be pen pals." Brittany let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her hand. Justin looked like he was about to pass out. His skin was the color of old ash. I held up a second finger. "Option 2 is the private route." I reached into Michael's briefcase and pulled out a thick, stapled document. It landed on the coffee table with a heavy thud. "This is a restructuring agreement," I said, "but let us call it what it really is. It is a labor contract. If you sign this, you admit to the debt, you admit to the fraud, and you agree to work it off." Justin looked at the paper, hope flickering in his eyes. "A payment plan," he asked, weak and trembling. "Like monthly installments?" I laughed coldly. "No, not a payment plan. You have no money to make payments with. This is an indentured service contract. You work for me now. You will take the job I give you. You will work the hours I set. You will live in the apartment I choose. And every single cent you earn above the poverty line goes to paying down the principal and the interest." I stepped closer, leaning down until my face was level with his. "I am not talking about a desk job, Justin. I am talking about real work. Hard work. The kind of work that makes your back break and your hands bleed. The kind of work I did for 40 years so you could wear those Italian shoes. You are going to learn what $1 actually costs. You are going to sweat for every penny. And at the current interest rate, you will be doing it for the rest of your natural life." I stood up and checked my watch. "Those are your choices. A cell bar or a shovel. Prison for 15 years or a life of hard labor to repay the man you tried to kill. The police are on speed dial and the officers are 5 minutes away. You have exactly 60 seconds to decide. Pick up the pen or hold out your wrists for the handcuffs. The clock starts now." The choices hung in the air like smoke, but Brittany was not a woman who made bad deals. She looked at the contract on the table and then at Justin, who was still shivering on the floor. She looked at the grim faces of the lawyers and the cold eyes of the man she had left for dead. In her mind, the calculation was simple. Justin was a sinking ship, and she had no intention of drowning with him. She snatched her fur coat from the floor and threw it over her shoulders. "I am not signing anything," she announced, her voice shrill and trembling with adrenaline. "This has nothing to do with me. I did not forge the signature. I did not borrow the money from the loan sharks. I am just the wife. I am a victim of his stupidity just as much as you are, Douglas." She stepped over Justin's legs as if he were a piece of discarded luggage. She did not even look down at him. "I am leaving," she said, clutching her purse. "I am filing for divorce in the morning. You can have him. You can have the debt. You can have this miserable house. I am going to my mother's." She marched toward the front door, her heels clicking sharply on the wood. She reached for the handle, convinced that she could just walk away from the wreckage she had helped create. She pulled the door open, ready to step out into the snow and hail a cab. But she never made it across the threshold. The night outside was no longer dark. It was exploding with red and blue light. The driveway was filled with cruisers, their sirens chirping in short, sharp bursts. Uniformed officers were already coming up the steps, their hands resting on their holsters. Brittany stumbled back into the hallway, gasping for air. "Mrs. Bennett," one of the officers asked, stepping into the foyer. He was a large man with a face that had seen too many lies to be charmed by a pretty blonde in a fur coat. "Yes," she stammered, trying to compose herself, trying to put on the mask of the innocent socialite. "Yes, that is me. Thank God you are here. My father-in-law has broken in. He is holding us hostage. He has a gun." The officer did not look at me. He did not look at the shotgun resting harmlessly on the chair. He looked straight at Brittany and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "We are not here for him, ma'am," he said, his voice flat. "We are here for you." Brittany Titten. Nicole Bennett, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and elder abuse. Brittany screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of disbelief. You are making a mistake, she yelled, backing away until she hit the wall. It was Justin. He did it. He signed the papers. I did not do anything. I stood up, then leaning heavily on my cane. That is not entirely true, is it? Brittany, I said softly. You see, while you were celebrating earlier, while you were drinking my champagne and laughing about how I was frozen solid, you were performing for an audience. I pointed to the smoke detector on the ceiling. The tiny red light blinked once. I sent the video files to Detective Miller about an hour ago, I explained. The video of you telling the locksmith to drill the safe. The video of you stuffing the cash into your purse. And my personal favorite, the audio recording where you told Justin that my death was a mercy. It is all there, Brittany. Every word, every lie. You are not just an accessory. You are the mastermind. The officer stepped forward and spun her around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final. Brittany thrashed against the restraint, screaming curses at me, at Justin, at the world. She looked wild and ugly, her face twisted with the realization that her charm had finally run out. As they dragged her out the door, kicking and screaming into the cold night, I felt a strange sense of calm. The house was quiet again. The parasite had been removed. Now only the host and the disease remained. The flashing red and blue lights from the cruisers outside swept across the living room walls, like a heartbeat painting the space in alternating shades of violence and cold. Brittany was gone. Her shrill accusations and screaming had faded into the night, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than the noise. Now it was just the two of us. The old man and the boy. The creditor and the debtor. Justin was still on his knees on the hardwood floor. He looked small. He looked like he did when he was 5 years old and had broken a vase playing ball in the house. He looked up at me with eyes that were red and swollen, swimming in tears. He reached out a trembling hand, trying to touch the hem of my coat. It was a pathetic gesture, the desperate reach of a drowning man looking for a lifeline. Dad, he choked out, his voice cracking. Dad, please. You cannot let them take me. She made me do it. Brittany made me do it. I am your son. I am your boy. You promised Mom. You promised you would take care of me. Do not do this to me. The mention of his mother hit me like a physical blow. He was using her memory as a shield. He was twisting the sacred promise I made to a dying woman into a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was the final insult. It was the last piece of evidence I needed to prove that the son I loved was truly gone. I looked down at him, and for a long, agonizing moment I searched for the boy I used to know. I looked for the toddler I taught to walk in the backyard. I looked for the teenager I taught to drive on these very streets. I looked for the young man I sent to college with so much hope. But they were all gone. The thing kneeling on my floor was a stranger. It was a creature of greed and weakness that would eat me alive if I gave it the chance. I stepped back, moving out of his reach. My face felt like it was carved from stone. I felt nothing. No anger, no hate. Just a vast, arctic emptiness where my heart used to be. Do not call me that. I said, my voice low and steady, echoing in the empty room. Do not use that word. But you are my father. Justin wailed, the tears streaming down his face. You are my dad. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. That man is dead. Douglas Bennett, the father, died 3 days ago. He died alone and shivering on a plastic bench in the Istanbul airport. He died when his son walked away and left him to rot. He died waiting for a rescue that never came. The cold killed him, Justin. You killed him. Justin froze, his mouth hanging open. The horror of what I was saying finally sank in. He saw the look in my eyes and he realized there was no mercy left. The man standing in front of you is not your father, I continued, my voice hard as steel. I am just a ghost who came back to settle the accounts. And the account is closed, Justin. The balance is 0. I looked at the officer standing by the door. He was waiting patiently, holding the warrant in his hand. He looked at me for a sign. I did not speak. I simply nodded once. A sharp, decisive motion that severed the last tie between us. The officer stepped forward. He pulled Justin to his feet. My son did not fight. He went limp, his legs dragging on the floor like a dead weight. He stared at me as they clicked the cuffs onto his wrists. His eyes were wide and empty. He looked like he was watching the world end. "Dad," he whispered one last time. I turned my back on him. "Goodbye, Justin," I said to the empty fireplace. They walked him out the door and into the snow. I heard the car door slam. I heard the engine start. I did not watch them drive away. I stood alone in the house I had built, listening to the silence return. I had won. My enemies were defeated. My fortune was secure. But as I stood there in the cold light of the chandelier, I realized that victory tastes a lot like ash. I was the king of my castle again, but it was a kingdom of one. The sun came up over Chicago, pale and cold, but it brought a strange kind of clarity with it. I stood on the front porch with a mug of black coffee steaming in my hand, watching the heavy yellow truck back into the driveway. It was not a moving van. It was a disposal service. I had hired them at dawn with a single specific instruction. If it was not in this house 10 years ago, get rid of it. I did not want to sell their things. I did not want to donate them. I wanted them erased. The crew was efficient, a team of 4 men in gray coveralls who moved with military precision. They marched into the house like they were clearing a hazardous waste site, and in a way they were. I watched them carry out Brittany's wardrobe first. Armfuls of silk and fur, designer dresses that cost more than a year of college tuition stuffed unceremoniously into heavy black contractor bags. The white fur coat she had worn the night before, the one she tried to flee in, was tossed onto the pile like a dead animal. It landed in the dumpster with a soft, satisfying thud. Then came Justin's toys. The chrome espresso machine that took up half the counter, the curved gaming monitor, the stack of self-help books about cryptocurrency and getting rich quick that he had never actually read. I watched a worker carry out the ergonomic office chair Justin had bought with my stolen retirement money. He threw it into the crushing jaws of the truck, and I heard the plastic snap. It sounded like a bone breaking. I did not flinch. Every item that left the house felt like a weight being lifted off my chest. Every bag that went out the door took a little bit of the toxicity with it. They stripped the sheets off the beds. They cleared the bathroom counters of the hundreds of bottles of creams and lotions Brittany used to mask her soul. They took down the modern abstract art Justin had hung over the fireplace, replacing my landscape paintings. The house was being stripped down to the studs, emotionally speaking. The cleaning crew scrubbed the floors and washed the windows, removing the fingerprints of the parasites who had lived here. When the living room was finally empty, I walked back inside. The air smelled of bleach and lemon polish. The scent of stale champagne and expensive perfume was gone. The house echoed with my footsteps. It felt larger now. I walked over to the closet under the stairs, the one place they had been too lazy to clear out. I reached into the back and pulled out the old boxes. My boxes. I took out the framed photo of Catherine, the one taken on our honeymoon in Maine, where the wind was blowing her hair across her face. I dusted off the glass with my sleeve and hung it back on the wall above the mantel where it had hung for 30 years. Her smile seemed to warm the room instantly. I pulled out the old Afghan rug, the one with the coffee stain from 1998, and rolled it out over the hardwood covering the spot where Justin had cowered the night before. I was putting the pieces of my life back together one by one. I sat down in my leather chair and looked around. I was alone. The silence was deep and profound. But it was not lonely. It was clean. I had reclaimed my sanctuary. The morning sun poured through the kitchen windows of my house, washing the room in a pale golden light that felt like a benediction. The coffee in my mug was hot and strong, the way I liked it, and for the first time in years, it didn't taste like anxiety. Michael and Arthur sat across from me at the old oak table. We didn't need to say much. We were just three old war horses catching our breath after a battle. The silence wasn't heavy or awkward. It was the comfortable silence of men who have done what needed to be done. Arthur looked at me over the rim of his glasses. He still looked a little shaken by the events of the last 24 hours. He was a lawyer, he was used to paperwork and arguments, not raids and arrests. "Are you sure you are all right, Doug?" he asked, his voice soft. "It is going to be a quiet house. You know we can still advocate for a plea deal if you are having second thoughts. It is not too late to ask for leniency." I set my mug down and looked him in the eye. I waited for the guilt to come. I waited for the pang of regret that a father is supposed to feel when his child is behind bars. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a profound sense of relief. It was the feeling of taking off a heavy pack after a 100-mile march. It was the feeling of waking up after a surgery to remove a tumor that had been slowly killing you. The incision hurts, and the scar will always be there, but the sickness is gone. The poison is out of the system. "No, Arthur," I said calmly. "I have no second thoughts. I did not put him in that cell. His greed put him there. His choices put him there. I just refuse to be the victim of them anymore. I am not sad. I am free." Michael chuckled a low, rumbling sound from his chest. He reached out and tapped his knuckles on the table. "You are a tough old bird, Douglas. I have seen men half your age fold under less pressure. So what is the plan? You have got the house back. You have got your accounts unlocked. What does a man back from the dead do with the rest of his life?" I looked out the window at the melting snow in the garden. The cardinals were back in the feeder. The world looked different today. It didn't look like a trap. It looked like an open door. "I think I am going to take a trip," I said, smiling. "A real trip this time. Not a budget flight to a cold city where I sleep in airports. I am going to use my money. I am going to buy a first-class ticket. I have always wanted to see the Amalfi Coast. Or maybe New Zealand. I want to see mountains. I want to drink wine by the ocean. I want to live." I stood up and walked to the window, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The hip pain was still there, a dull ache that reminded me I was mortal, but it was manageable. I was 70 years old, but I felt like I was 20. My life belonged to me again. I was no longer a wallet. I was no longer a burden. I was Douglas Bennett. I turned back to my friends and raised my coffee mug in a toast. "To new beginnings," I said. Michael and Arthur raised their cups. "To new beginnings." I took a sip and let the warmth spread through my chest. The nightmare was over. The winter was ending. And as I looked at the bright blue sky, I knew that for me the spring was just beginning. Douglas's story is a powerful reminder that unconditional love should never mean unconditional tolerance. We often believe that shielding our children from every consequence is an act of kindness, but sometimes it only prevents them from growing while slowly destroying us. The hardest lesson Douglas learned was that you cannot save someone who is determined to drown you. True strength is not just enduring pain, but having the courage to cut the ties that bind you to toxicity, even if it breaks your heart. His journey teaches us that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity and choose your own peace. If you were in Douglas's shoes, would you have shown mercy, or did Justin get exactly what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.